talk about the film Shawshank Redemption, which is a favorite film for many people, including many Koreans, because I think it often appears on late-night TV, on Korean TV, and many Koreans have seen this film. It first came out in 1994, so now it's 10 years old. But for some people, it's one of the greatest of all films. And I'm a little torn about this, and I'll tell you the problem, but it's impossible not to love the film, I think. Its greatness may be questioned, I don't know. It's based on a short story by Stephen King. Now, I don't know how well Koreans know Stephen King. He has written many horror stories, many psychological kind of thrillers, disturbing things, The Shining, and strange people like extraterrestrials invade the earth, and terrible things happen. Gloomy author, really. Hugely successful. Now, interestingly, he also did Green Mile. Green Mile is based on his story. Now, Green Mile and Shawshank have a lot in common. And I've talked about Green Mile. Green Mile and Shawshank are both basically uplifting. Because really this is a triumph of hope. Hope under very bleak circumstances. Okay, the central character is Andy Dufresne. The second central character is Red. Red, played by Morgan Freeman, black man. Red narrates the story, and Morgan Freeman's voice is great. Okay, Andy was put into Shawshank. Shawshank was a prison in Maine, state of Maine. Andy had been put there. It was a high security prison too for murderers. Andy had been put there in 1947, accused and convicted of having killed his wife and her lover, having found them together in bed. It was a brutal murder. Whoever did it first shot these people, then reloaded the gun and shot them again after they were very dead. So it seemed to be a crime of rage, jealousy, and so forth. In any case, Andy had been a banker, pretty successful banker, lived comfortably. But his personality is very reserved. He was not talkative, not outgoing, introspective. And this reserve is what got him convicted, because he showed no emotion at his own trial, apparently. In any case, he was convicted. Now, Red, a very different kind of man, the black man, the narrator, had also been convicted of murder, a murder which he had committed. Of course, these actors are so great and so very adorable that it's hard to believe that these men killed, but possibly. Anyway, so Red tells about, he recalls the time when Andy arrived at the prison. He kept to himself, had very little contact with anyone. Now, Red, who had already been there for several years in that prison, was a practical man. And he was, as he called himself, the Sears and Roebuck of the prison, which meant that he could get anything for anybody. Give him the money, and he would find a way to get cigarettes, alcohol, other supplies, candy, whatever. He would get it. So he was popular and important in the prison, and he had a circle of friends. But his friends were pretty mindless fellows, and Red had, of course, no education. Andy was much more educated, much better educated than any of the other prisoners, and that was another reason why he stayed to himself. But gradually he had more and more contact with Red, and a kind of friendship grows there. Now, the other main characters, first of all, the Warden, Warden Norton. A warden is a head of a prison. He is a man who always carries his Bible, a little man, a little dark, furtive man, but he is a sadist, really. I think he's a sadist. And he uses the Bible, which he claims to believe, really almost cynically. I would say he's a man who's in despair. Probably once he had been religious, and now he almost uses it to mock himself and others in this place of hopelessness, in this place of cruelty, where all kinds of bad things happen as perhaps in any prison, but especially in an American prison. Okay, so the warden. Second, Mr. Hadley, the head of the guards. He's another sadist. He's big and tall, a violent man, unforgiving, brutal man. And the other guards are brutal, pretty brutal too. Another character who appears relatively early, I don't know his name, and I couldn't find it in the reviews that I read, but let's just call him Jack. Jack is a balding man, and he's a cynical sadist too. And he and his friends love to rape men, force them into sexual acts. But the interesting thing is, of course, they are not homosexuals. They are sadists. What excites them is beating and hurting and inflicting violence on their victims. That's what gets them excited. And I think it wouldn't matter if they were women or men. As it happens, there are only men in the prison. That's it. These men discover Andy, who works, like all of the prisoners have jobs, works in a laundry. And from time to time, anyone who works in the laundry has to go to some other room to get supplies or get soap or something. And these men, these sadists, are there waiting for them, especially waiting for Andy. And again they attack Andy. And Andy defends himself as well as he can, hurts them sometimes, is always clever, but of course it's 4 against 1, 3 or 4 against 1, and they get him, and they hurt him. But he will always fight them. Why? Because he's so disgusted by homosexuality? I doubt that. I think it's just his will not to surrender to such barbarism, his will not to surrender to such sadism and such cruelty. In short, it's his will to keep hope. After all, he's an innocent man in prison. He did not kill his wife. He did not kill the lover. Somebody else did. And Red's advice is, forget hope. Hope is a sickness. Hope will only make one in a situation like this, in a prison, more desperate, more unhappier. Forget hope. But Andy tells Red, no, you're wrong. Where there's no hope, we lose everything. We lose everything. And this is the core of the film. Now, years pass. After a couple of years, one day, the warden calls out for some prisoners to volunteer for a special roof duty. They are going to remake a roof in the hot summer weather. And Red, Morgan Freeman, knows that this is a good thing because at least they'll get out of their prison cells. They'll get out of the normal prison environment. So he and his friends and Andy are successful in getting this duty, this extra duty. Now, I suppose there are about 10 of the prisoners. There are about 10 guards, including Hadley and others. They relax while the prisoners work. But Andy overhears. They're up on a roof now, up on about like the buildings near my house here, the 3rd, 4th, 5th floor. Andy overhears Hadley complaining that he's having tax problems, that he got an insurance payoff, something for his wife maybe, but that Uncle Sam, the U.S. government, will take most of it, and it makes him so angry. and Andy's listening attentively. Andy, incredibly, to the amazement of the other prisoners, breaks away from them and walks over, approaches Hadley. No one can believe this. This is like suicide. Hadley would be capable of killing a man for doing this. Andy speaks strangely, but what he says to Hadley is, I can help you. I can save you $30,000. I can help you. You crazy ass. And he takes him over to the edge of the building, and we really think he's going to push him off. He's the kind of man who would do that easily. Easily. Almost, it would be a pleasure to him. But $30,000. So then Andy explains to him the tax laws about which Hadley had been unaware. And he persuades him that he can help him a lot. Now this is a big turning point, because now when the next time when those sadists, the 4 sadists, attack Andy, it's a terrible time, and they beat him terribly. He's hospitalized every time, but this time he's hospitalized for maybe 2 months. They hurt him so badly. But the next scene we see Jack, the head sadist prisoner, the rapist. Jack returns to his cell one day, and there are Hadley and 2 of the other guards. And they close the gate, they close the door. Well, Jack has no idea why Hadley would be angry at him. Hadley almost kills him. He beats him so badly with that stick, he almost kills him. And in the following scene, Jack is carried away in an ambulance to a mental hospital where he will spend the rest of his life in a state of idiocy, sipping through a straw any food he might take in because his mouth and teeth are so messed up. Earlier, he had made jokes. He was going to be transferred to the mental hospital. Ha 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 ha. What a good joke that would be on the system. Well, the irony is, yes, he is transferred there to spend the rest of his life as a vegetable almost. So, that was the end of Andy's troubles with those guys. They would never trouble him again. In fact, everybody stayed away from Andy and didn't trouble Andy because they knew that Hadley and the guards would hurt them badly. Now Andy starts to become a very popular man. He offers his services to the other guards too, that is, as a tax consultant for free. And other people just line up, and Andy helps them. And Andy has his helpers, including Red and other people. Now this leads Andy to spend time in the library. And Andy is a thinking man. Now, by the way, I forgot to mention, but earlier, Andy had succeeded in getting from Red, who can get anything, a big poster of Rita Hayworth. Now, Rita Hayworth was the beautiful actress of the 1930s. The kind of pin-up girl, though pin-ups did not reveal very much in those times, but this poster was very important to Andy, and he put it on his wall. Of course, from time to time, there were inspections of the cells, and the warden would even come in. And the warden didn't like that pin-up, but Andy was also a student of the Bible. And he was the only prisoner, of course, with whom the warden could even discuss the Bible. And so the warden respected Andy's intelligence, especially about the Bible, and let Andy keep that pin-up. Again, a large poster. And sometimes he would get a new one to replace the old one. The title, by the way, of Stephen King's story, the original work that inspired this movie, is Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. As you'll see, this becomes almost a joke. But a nice joke, really. Okay, back to our story. Now Andy spends more and more time out of his cell as a tax advisor, and he even starts to advise the warden. And he also becomes a kind of librarian. He takes this as his mission. He writes letters to congressmen, to wealthy families, to political commissions of this or this, and writes more and more letters until finally they yield to his will and contribute either books or money to buy books. And suddenly the Shawshank Library is the biggest prison library anywhere. And this is all because of Andy. Now we get to know a little bit the librarian. Andy's never officially the librarian, I guess. An aging man played by a little bit famous actor, James Whitmore, plays this kind of morose but nice man, gentleman really, not educated, who is the librarian. Now the librarian works closely with Red, because the librarian pushes his cart around with books, and this means that he has easy access to each of the cells. And so Red, when Red is getting cigarettes or alcohol or something for people, slips this to the librarian on his cart. The librarian gets his little payoff too, and then the librarian delivers a book to someone else, and with it the cigarettes or whatever has been procured by Red. So the system works. A little corrupt, but harmless really for these men. Many of the scenes in the film, especially in the early parts of the film, are almost black and white. That is, the gray world of prison, gray and brown and dull colors. It's a drab and soul-crushing existence, with violence too. Okay, years pass. In one memorable moment, Andy succeeds in getting a record, early records, 78 RPMs. I remember them in my childhood, my first records, everybody's first, really. And he has a record of Le Nozze di Figaro, Mozart's Marriage of Figaro, or at least one song, the beautiful, very moving song between Cherubino and Susanna. And one day, Andy has control of the record player and the loudspeaker system. He locks the doors. It's all glass, actually, because you have to be able to see the prisoners and all of this. He locks the doors, turns on the loudspeaker system out in the yard, everywhere. Ooh, and then he turns on this beautiful, this beautiful music. Red's way, Morgan Freeman's way of telling about it is very moving too. Because these are men who had never been exposed to beauty like this. So it's a very moving moment. Okay. Naturally, the Warden is furious, and Hadley is furious. And if Andy hadn't been Andy, he would have been beaten badly. But I think they give him some solitary confinement. So we learn about solitary confinement, a punishment for prisoners who misbehave. They are put into solitary confinement for 2 weeks. That's a rough stint. 2 weeks is a rough stint. Okay, Andy is put in there for 2 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks, a long time. Now comes another turning point in the film. Andy is now working for the Warden, and the Warden is basically laundering money, as we say. That is, taking money that really belongs to the prison and putting it into some private account, which is his. But he needs a banker's help. He needs Andy to do this well. Andy takes all that money, puts it into the account, keeps the records that the warden can look at any time, and the warden basically trusts him. Now, along comes Tommy. Tommy is a young prisoner who's very charming, energetic. Everybody likes him right away. He's youthful, optimistic kind of. Although he's maybe 25, 26 years old, he has already spent years in prisons. He's been around for petty thievery, stealing not even cars, maybe a car. Okay. Tommy gets to know Andy very well because Andy is determined to help him get a high school degree, to give him some hope. And he trains him. Tommy is almost illiterate, but Andy works very hard to help him, teach him to read. And then comes the day when Tommy takes the GED, the established exam. If he can pass, he'll have a high school diploma. He takes the exam, but he's disgusted. He's sure he has failed it. He's totally sure he has failed it. And he even gets angry at Andy. It's a terrible scene. But then, Tommy and Red come to see Andy with a strange story. And Tommy tells this story. And we see the story while Tommy tells the story. It seems that Tommy, in an earlier prison where he had been, where he'd spent a couple of years, I guess, had a cellmate who was a very disturbing man. This was a man who clearly loved violence. So he was so deeply disturbed, even by Shawshank standards, this was a scary, scary man. And Tommy remembers that man's telling him about his various killings. And he told a story about breaking into a house in the suburbs somewhere and finding a woman and the woman's lover in the house, and his pleasure at killing them, and his greater pleasure when he discovered that the husband had been convicted for the crime, for the murder, for the double murder. And his telling about this is so disturbing. There are a lot of disturbing people in this movie. It could easily topple into a very dark, extremely depressing movie. The balance is very tight. On the negative features are so powerful and so negative, so disturbing. And on the positive side, there's only really the friendship of Andy and Red, and a little bit the friendship that the other men have for each other, and for Andy and Red, especially Andy. It's Andy's spirit of hope and his goodness, really, because they all know he's innocent. The prison joke is everybody's innocent. Everybody says he's innocent. Well, Red admits that he was guilty. The others know they're guilty, but the others all know that Andy's innocent too. They know it. Of course, there's nothing anybody can do. But now Tommy and Red come and tell Andy about this conversation, or this monologue, and Andy realizes, wait a minute, could we find this man? Sure, I'm sure he's in some prison. He's probably still in the same prison. We know his name, everything. So Andy goes to the warden, and Andy tells the warden what Tommy has said. Tommy knows this. And the warden dismisses it completely. The warden says, forget it. Nothing, this is just a lie, or this is just foolery. The warden now needs Andy, so the warden will never let Andy go. And Andy, in a strange, wonderful moment, says, don't you see, sir? Don't you see? I'm innocent. It's obvious that I'm innocent, and I can prove it. Forget it. Sir, how can you be so obtuse? Whoa, big moment. Obtuse, stupid. How can you be so obtuse? Well, to say that to that warden who has absolute control of life and death, absolute control over everybody in that place. Well, the warden is furious. Puts him in solitary confinement for 2 months. 2 weeks was the legal limit. 2 months. Well, most men would crack. Most men would go insane under that circumstance. And really, Andy almost does. But at a certain key moment, one of the guards comes by. He's not allowed to talk to anybody in there. But one of the guards delivers a lunch or something, a meal to Andy, and says, Tommy passed. Tommy passed the exam. Tommy got his high school diploma. Well, this is a great moment in several ways. Number one, this is hope for Tommy. Number two, this is hope for humanity, because that guard had the decency, the kindness, the magnanimity to give that news to Andy at a time when Andy must have been crumbling. And that news, I think, probably even saves Andy's sanity, as strong as Andy was. That news, that moment, that's an amazing moment. Meanwhile, though, the warden, aware that Tommy knows this secret, arranges to meet Tommy late one night at midnight in a lonely place in the prison. It's nighttime, there's some lights, and Tommy is brought by a guard. The warden is there waiting for him. The thing is that the warden has arranged that a sharpshooter, one of the guards, be up on the roof right through Tommy's head. Tommy is dead. Tommy is dead. A brutal, brutal murder by a cynical, brutal, disturbed man, that warden. But of course this is the end of any hope for Andy. Now Andy works more and more for the warden, more and more submissively. The warden treats him like a servant. Now comes the huge revelation. I have to go back to the beginning of the film, but that's okay. Near the beginning of the film, when Red and Andy got to know each other, we learn that Andy is interested in rocks. And he asks Red to get him a little hammer, sharp little hammer. And Andy keeps a rock collection on his window in his cell. And the warden comments on this. This is strange. This is really against prison rules, but I'll let it be because apparently it's harmless. And there are references, 2 or 3 more references in the film to Andy's little interest in rocks. Now, finally we learn what's happening. Andy, for years, for 16 years, has been behind that Rita Hayworth poster, has been chipping through the wall. And every night, all night, often, he would chip away as much as a foot every night. Had to be very quiet, of course. What did he do with all that rock? He would put it in his pockets, and when he went out into the courtyard, as he walked along, he would dump those rocks through his pants. No one ever noticed. No one ever noticed. As Andy walked along, rock matter dropping out of his pants from the bottom. He would leave a trail, but quickly other people would walk along there, and soon it would be gone. For 16 years, Andy had worked behind that Rita Hayworth poster, And those times when the warden came and wanted to tear it down, oh my God, well, that would have been Andy's death right there. He would have been a dead man right there. So close. And no wonder he needed new posters, because down every night, up in the morning, down every night, up in the morning. 16 years he has been planning this prison break. And he knows where he's going, and he knows what has to happen. He has to wait for a night when there's thunder, a storm. Because in order to get out, he's going to go through the walls a mile, a long way. And then he's going to have to escape through the sewage, the toilet pipe, which is quite large, that drains all the toilet, all the excrement and all the urine of the prisoners and everybody. Through this, it all flows, and he's going to have to crawl through that a mile, if he can survive that, to where it dumps, wherever it dumps, and it dumps into a kind of small lake, a pond, really. Now, Andy also has gotten some shoes, a suit, a change of clothes, and he's going to try to keep that dry so that when he gets out, he can then put on some decent clothes, hitchhike downtown, and then he will go to the bank. And at the bank, he has arranged, because all the warden's money is in an account known only to him, Andy. $200,000, a lot of money. A lot of money. And Andy will have the driver's license, all the identification he needs to prove that he is that Mr. John Smith or whoever. He will take out that money, and he will go. He will escape. Buy a car. He has a new identity, and then find a way to escape. After his one long term in solitary confinement, 2 months, he tells Red, remember this, if you ever get out of here, go to a small town named Hadleyburg or something. Drive outside that town, you will find a stone wall. Follow that stone wall to the end. Then follow it on a turn, and you will find an oak tree. You'll see a big rock there. Under that rock, you will find instructions to find me. Well, this is amazing. Anyway, Andy breaks out. It's the triumphant moment, though very scary. He's got his suit of clothing, he's got his shoes on and all that. He has to wait for the lightning and thunder, but when it strikes, he hits the tube there, the pipe, hits it with violence until finally it cracks. It cracks enough so that he can climb through there, and he will crawl a mile through that terrible, disgusting stuff to freedom. And a great moment for some, I'm not sure, but I guess it is, comes when we watch him as he falls out of the pipe, which is large, of course, into that pool of water, and he stands there, the lightning and thunder, he's shirtless, and holds his hands up like this. It really is a great moment. Okay, now the warden discovers the next morning that he's gone. He goes into the cell, tears down the Rita Hayworth poster, and there it is. And there it is. He's furious, of course. Calls the police, calls the state guard, the state troopers, everybody. Everybody's looking for Andy. It's incredible if he'll get away. Then he... Andy goes to the bank, looking very nice, gentleman's suit, everything. They treat him very kindly. And then Andy sends a package to the police. A big package. This package contains all the evidence to destroy the warden. all the evidence, all the proof that of all the warden's crimes. So the next day we see the warden sitting in his office, and the police come for him. He locks his door. This is a great moment for many people, if there's any vengeance in our hearts, because the warden sits calmly at his desk, takes a gun out, puts it in his mouth, and we hear that shot. Most people will be glad. Most people will be glad. It's not nice, but his cruelty was so huge. Okay, Andy gets away. Now a couple of years more pass. Every year, Red goes up for parole. He talks to the board of parole, but we're now in the 60s, and the 60s are friendly to blacks, the civil rights movement and all of that. And Andy gives them his usual little speech, yes, I'm a changed man and all that, which before he used to give almost laughingly, and they approve. He's out. Well, he can't believe it. A librarian, that librarian earlier had gotten out too, but he's a lost man. He needed prison. He can't make it on the outside. He was more comfortable in the prison than he could be on the outside, and he went and he hung himself in a terrible scene. A lonely man, but I think he's glad to die. Red is a little bit like that. He can't make it. He can't adjust. But he goes to that town, finds the tree, looks in there, and there's money for him and a letter telling him to go to Southern California, cross the border into Baja, which is south of the Californian border in Mexico, go along the coast there 100 miles. The final scene. Okay, the final scene. Red does all this, and in the there's Andy on the beach working on his boat, which is what he loves. He has bought a kind of small hotel. There'll be people there from time to time. He'll just take care of that hotel, take care of his boat, and live his life in comfort for him the rest of his life. Red, we see there too. Now, great movie. I've often been disturbed at this a little bit too triumphant triumph of hope. We need hope, it's true, and Andy's right. But so much of this film is so terrible. And the shift to a kind of happy ending requires a little bit of a leap of faith, I think. And I sometimes have that and sometimes don't myself. But it's a wonderful film. Thank you.